Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our informational interview sessions. My name is Laura Kay, and I'm the president of the New England Franco-Haitian Youth Federation. Our next guest is no stranger to the area, to the Federation. It's none other than the Pastor Edsel Cadet. Pastor Cadet is of Haitian descent and pastors the Cambridge SDA Church in Everett. Pastor Cadet, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you.
Good to be on. Thanks for having me, Laura. It's an honor and a privilege.
All right, so we're gonna jump right in and learn a little bit about your journey to becoming a pastor and anything else that you're pursuing. So my first question is for you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself. So I am Haitian American, born and raised in New York, recently married. Wow, really? We're starting with that energy already. It's okay. It's all right. So born and raised in New York. Been married now for 2 years to my wonderful wife, Nyasha. I've been pastoring for just about, this summer is going to make it 8 years now, which it doesn't feel like at all. So I've been in Massachusetts for about, I think, 6 years now. Wow. Okay. And that's been a wonderful, wonderful experience, and it continues to be. I'm also pursuing a master's in clinical mental health counseling with a concentration in marriage and family therapy and an emphasis in African and Caribbean mental health. And I have like 1 year left in that program. Really excited for that, really learning a lot. And maybe I should tell you my hobbies, right? Uh,
Why not?
all right, you want to know a little bit about myself? I love playing basketball, love watching basketball, and love watching cartoons.
Fun fact, pastors don't really tell us fun facts, so thanks for sharing that.
Not a problem. I got you.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your industry of being a pastor, and you're also talking about going on this journey of becoming a mental health counselor, so would love to hear about that as well.
Good. All right. Yeah, sure. I'll tell you now, I did not want to be a pastor. Growing up, initially I wanted to be an astronaut. And then when I learned about like all the math and physics that went into that, I was like, nah, no thanks. I just want to be in space. So I don't want to have to go through that whole process. So then I transitioned and I realized like I always want to help people, especially people who are in need. So after that, I wanted to become a defense attorney, just because I saw how like Black people were often unrepresented or underrepresented or didn't get the best representation in the criminal justice system. So I wanted to help stem that tide and keep Black men and women out of prison. So I wanted to be a defense attorney and eventually a judge. And I went to Stony Brook University, studied English, graduated, was getting ready to take the LSATs and to go to law school. And I just sensed the Lord was like pulling me towards ministry. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. My experience with church and ministry growing up wasn't always the healthiest. So my perception of ministry was like, it's full of politics, church drama, church board meetings. And I was like, I don't want to deal with any of that. Like I can love the Lord and serve in a ministry without being all up in it like that. But I took the LSATs, did well, but I still couldn't shake this calling that I just sensed over my life. And I kept meeting other people who were doing what I thought I wanted to do with my life. They were attorneys, they were like in the field, they were making the money, they had the prestige, and they weren't fulfilled. And I was like, man, I feel like I'm kind of like seeing my future here. So I said, you know what? I've never gone wrong trusting God. So let me not be a Jonah where God is gonna have to redirect me when I'm 40, when I'm 50. Let me not wake up with this feeling of regret, like, man, I should have been doing something else. Like that was my fear. So I said, let me be obedient and let's just see what happens. So right before I handed in law school applications, I told my family, like, listen, I'm not doing this anymore. Uh, there was a lot of disappointment. There was a lot of a lot of confusion. But I just knew I knew that I couldn't find peace or be happy doing anything else. So while I was scared, I still also knew like the path that I was on was a path that that I hadn't really chosen. It was a path that I felt like I needed to choose because, growing up Haitian household, there are only certain professions that are pre-approved, right? You have to be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, a nurse, everything else after that is kind of like we're not you don't know how people are going to feel about it. And I realized like a lot of my decision making up until that point was about pleasing other people and not about necessarily honoring God and recognizing the gifts that were within me, and the calling that was placed upon me. So it was a bold move. 23 years old, went off to Andrews University, and got my master's in divinity, which prepared me for pastoral ministry. The master's in divinity degree takes about 2.5 to 3 years to complete.
Wow. I love that you talked about listening to God and being obedient and following the call, because I think that's something that a lot of people run away from, because like, you know what you want to do, you have your heart set on doing this thing, like you really knew you wanted to be a lawyer, and all of a sudden God is like, nah, 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 go this way. And it's like, but I don't want to go this way, I want to go this way, I want to do what I want to do. And so it's important for everyone listening to just really trust him. And it sounds like being a pastor has been fulfilling so far. um,
Yes,
yeah. Can you
definitely.
tell us a little bit, and you started talking about this, but about the role that you feel like faith plays in your career? And yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The role faith plays in my career. Like faith it is kind of my career. To have faith is it's the main job description, right? To love the Lord, to love our neighbor, and part of loving the Lord is having faith in him. So it's an interesting experience in that every message that I prepare, I have to go through. I have to experience on some level. It has to first do its work in me before I can share it out. So my prayer is always like, let my sermons be my testimony. And that's tough sometimes, because there are times when, and it happens especially earlier in my pastoral ministry, and I didn't understand what was going on, where it's like I'm preaching about having more faith, and suddenly I have all these trials this week that are showing me how to have more faith. Like God is like, you want sermon content? Yes, study the word. Yes, study the commentaries and other inspired writings, but I'm gonna give you some real life experience to add on top of this thing as well.
He's
So
so
there were
funny
so
like
many.
that.
I'm sorry.
I said he's so funny like that.
Yo, listen. Yes, he is. So, yeah, so the role that faith plays in my career is I have to live out what I'm sharing with others. And that can be challenging. The Lord will put you through it, but it's also such a rewarding process that I never regret it. I think the other dynamic that we often don't talk about is that when faith becomes a part of your career, it can be challenging to learn how to go on vacation from your career without going on vacation from your faith. Because, with most careers, there is a level of stress that comes along with it. And you need to be able to take a break from that to step back and step away from those things. Um, and when your faith is so intertwined with your career, it can be very difficult to learn how to just have the faith without the pressure of the career, how to read the Bible for yourself without also generating sermons. But it's like, no, this time is for me and for me alone. So that is a tightrope that I'm still learning how to walk. There are seasons where it's better, and I'm like, I know how to separate the two, and then there are seasons where it just everything feels enmeshed, and it's kind of tough. And then there are times when, because it's enmeshed, things are easier. So you never. It's a journey. It's a journey. Integrating faith and career, but it, like any relationship, it requires being attentive, making adjustments, and communicating with the Lord about where you are, what you need, and hearing from Him about where He wants to position you.
Wow, that's really good. I think that sometimes we tend to not humanize our pastors and think that, they're supposed to be up here and they're perfect and things like that. And just hearing you talk about balancing all of that helps us to understand really that pastors are just as human as us, and they go through their own journey of like their faith walk and things like that. And all of our journeys look different, but just hearing that perspective, I think, is important. Can you tell us a little bit about what a day in the life of a pastor looks like? Like, what is a typical day? And I'm sure there is no typical day, but like, what are some typical days, I guess?
Good question. Part of the reason I was drawn to pastoral ministry was because it's an adventure. Like there are no 2 days that are alike. You have to be self-motivated because you don't have too much oversight. There's nobody calling to check in and say, have you written your message for the week? Have you done the work of administration that you need to do? Have you done the reading on leadership? And have you started to implement programs 3, 4, 5 months in advance? Have you, called and checked up on people? Have you uh, made the hospital visit? So it's like, you have to have it in yourself to say, I'm going to get up and I'm going to get this done. So the freedom of that is liberating, and that's great. But if I were to talk about a typical day, it really depends on the season of pastoral ministry that you're in, the kind of church that you're pastoring. Different churches have different demographics, and different demographics have different needs. So there are churches that have much older populations that have been around for a very long time. Typically, pastors who are in those churches are conducting around, 15 to 20 funerals a year. And that takes a particular toll on a pastor, right? Whereas I'm at a church like Cambridge, where the population is much younger. I don't do that many funerals, which I'm very grateful for. But I think a typical day for a pastor is living in tension. It's living in tension, recognizing that um, in the morning, you might receive a phone call of somebody who has a diagnosis and you're praying with them. In the afternoon, you find out that someone is pregnant or is about to give birth and you're celebrating with them. And all that while, planning ministry for the area. It also includes just organizational challenges that might come your way. So you're not just using your creative side as you write messages, but you're also using your very logical side as you lead and as you administrate. So it really is living in the tension of, you might have your own personal thing going on, yet you're showing up for that youth ministry event and you're energetic and engaged to be there for the people, while nursing your own wounds, or you are at the same time having to celebrate with one family who's having a momentous event or experience, and another family who's going through grief or through some trial within their life. So it's one of those things where, depending on the size of your congregation, something is always happening. There's always an opportunity for you to be involved and for you to be engaged, and really managing and balancing the difference between where you need to be as the pastor or where you need to empower elders, deacons, church members to be there in your stead, so that the church community can continue to be serviced. So my days right now are unique because I'm a full-time student and I'm pastoring full-time at the same time. So let me try to give you one of those days, quick rundown. So that means that, waking up early, having time with the Lord, in class by 9. Depending on the day, class might run on Zoom from like 9 to about 5 p.m. During those times, right, I'm still responding to text messages from church members, maybe responding to a few emails. But many times after that ends, it's like, okay, we have about 8 hours worth of pastoral ministry work to get done right now. How can we do this as efficiently as possible? And making the phone calls, sending out the emails, organizing with others, empowering others to kind of lift the things that I might not have the same amount of time or energy to do. And then circling back and saying, okay, let's knock out this paper, this project. So many times it's like while driving or doing other things, I'm writing that paper in my head, or I'm writing that sermon in my head, and I'm working through different things. And one thing that I can say is I've experienced the grace of God like show up. Um, so for example, Wednesday, we were having an event and I wasn't supposed to preach on Wednesday at all. Like I had been like delegated away. And that morning I got a word and I was like, this is good. Like, okay, I'm gonna preach it like 3 months down the line, right? And then that night something happened and they were like, Pastor, can you preach? And I was like, you be looking out, like you be looking out. So I just, that very thing that hit me that morning, opened the Bible and it was ready to go. And so much of my experience while being in school has been, while being in, getting this master's program has been like that.
Wow, I hear a lot of organization and also really like you have to be in line with the spirit of God because if you're not, like if you're not listening to like if you missed that, like what would you have done? I mean, I'm sure you could have like preached something else, like something that you already had, but like God knew that you needed that for that Wednesday, you know what I mean? So being in tune with God as a pastor and not as a pastor is really, really important.
Definitely.
Wow, that's a lot. How do
It's a
you
lot.
like, do you have an agenda? Is like, how are you like, whoa, you have to be really organized, I feel.
Right. Yeah. How do I organize it? So there are times when I'm more on top of it than others, depending on like what's happening with school or what it's demanding of me and my time and my energy. Because with all of that, I'm still married, right? So which means, I'm still making breakfast. I'm still, making dinner at times.
You cooking?
I mean, we be chefing it up a little bit. So it's like those things are still very important. So I think what helps me is to really set certain priorities where it's like some things don't move, and then I have to fit everything else in around it. So um yeah, and then I guess planning way in advance, kind of having a vision for the next 3 months, who's doing what, how things should unfold. That helps me not have to spend too much time in the decision-making process throughout the week, where it's like those decisions have already been made. So one thing that I try to do is I try to capitalize on when inspiration hits. And when inspiration hits, we plan. So earlier this week, inspiration hit and I planned an entire sermon series, some remodeling projects for the church. And it was like, you stay in those moments because it's like, okay, you're speaking, you're sharing. Let me get it all as much as I can right now. And that helps as things come along week after week.
That's beautiful. I want to switch gears a little bit. You talked about earlier about like, you know, the journey of going to get your master's, how long it took. Did you have any prior experience? I know like growing up in the church, we get a lot of forced opportunities to participate and lead ministries and things like that. Do you feel like that's kind of necessary for someone who might be interested in being a pastor?
Great question. No, not necessary. I was never a youth leader. I never held a board position. My first time sitting on a church board, I was an assistant pastor. So like you don't need to have held position in order to serve effectively. I would suggest get academic training, go to seminary. Seminary will provide you with the leadership opportunities and the experience you need to help you transition into full-time pastoral work.
Awesome. We kind of been talking a lot about what are some of the challenges of your job. What are some of the rewards?
The rewards, it's like seeing a person go from A to Z. It's meeting that person and like seeing like, wow, they don't know where to go next. They don't know what to do with their lives. Their relationship with God is on the rocks. And then a few years later, you see them and you're like, man, like I'm so grateful I got to witness the journey of how they put their hand in God's hand and God transformed their life. Another reward is being part of such a loving community that's so supportive. When you go through things, they're there for you, they're there with you as well, and that's really such a blessing. Another reward is the process of receiving an inspired idea, sharing that, and then seeing it manifest in the lives of others. in positive ways, and being able to serve my community. I mentioned before that I always wanted to help people, and I'm still in the helping field. So um, yeah, that's a major reward. And then the other one is the freedom that comes with pastoral ministry, where we might be doing something this year, and then God says, you know what? No, next year we're doing something else, and we get to lead in that direction by faith. And that freedom, where it's like it's not the same thing every single day. And while that can come with stress, there's also a liberation and an excitement and a joy that can come with like, wow, this day looks very different than what I've than what I could have imagined. So yeah, those are some of the joys that come along with pastoral ministry.
If you could do it all over again, would you choose the same path for yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely. Yes. Um, I think the only thing I would do differently is I would have gotten into my master's program sooner, because I see how it's broadening my understanding of how to help and serve people. And I wish that I could have just brought this to bear earlier in my ministry. Or maybe I would have started down this path in my undergraduate studies. So yeah, all of those things are kind of like there, but would I still have become a pastor? Definitely.
When work is stressful, and you're balancing a lot of different things, what are some of the things that you do to take care of yourself?
Great question. I nap. I'm a big believer in the nap ministry. In fact, I've recently learned like if you nap too long, you're actually gonna wake up tired, more tired than when you went to sleep. So I've like mastered like the 10 to 12 minute nap that can like give you that boost that can carry you for another 2 hours. So that's helpful. I watch cartoons. Cartoons remind me of a time when I didn't have so much responsibility and pressure. So I go back to the old school, you know, Batman, Superman, Justice League, DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, all of those things. We go back to those. And what else do I do? Spend time with my wife. That's always a good time. And try to go out, try to work out. I've been working out more. I even play video games from time to time when I have the time. So yeah, quality time with friends, family, people who know Edsel and who knew Edsel before Edsel became Pastor Cadet. Um, that is always restorative to me.
I love that. You've been talking about this journey of taking on becoming a mental health counselor. Are you interested in pursuing any other opportunities that are different from like being a pastor, maybe in the future, or being a counselor full time and just a counselor?
Yeah, there's a part of me uh, that is kind of wrestling with if one day I'll say, you know, I'm just going to do mental health counseling. I'm open to that. I want to be obedient to the Lord and where He calls me to. So we'll see if He gives me permission to do that. Um, but I think ultimately I want to be in a position where I'm free, where if and when God says, okay, that's enough with pastoral ministry, I don't feel like I can only be here because I have to pay the bills. I want to be able to pivot or to transition if and when that time comes. I also think that pastors need rest. I think that this kind of work can really take a toll on the spirit. And being able to take a year off and do something different and come back, I think can be very helpful. Uh, a lot of people call it sabbaticals. So the work is organized right now, sabbaticals don't that doesn't really happen. But I do think that the way with what I'm studying, I might be able to create an opportunity where one day I can say, you know what, I want to take a year or two off, and I'm coming back, but I need to take a year or two off and just kind of restore my soul a little bit. But so these are all hypotheticals, things I'm thinking about. But ultimately, I think I'm glad to have the options to be able to say, what are we going to do next? So yeah.
That's awesome. So I have one last question for you, which is just if you have any advice for people who are thinking about pursuing pastoral ministry, what would you share with them?
Ooh, there's so much to share. One, of course, you have to make sure that you're called. You have to be convinced of your calling. Two, there's a pruning process that you're going to go through. Not everybody who starts with you is going to end with you. Not everyone who knew you before you became a pastor can manage the tension of the high calling that is upon you while still accepting the reality of the fact that you're a sinner. So some friends won't make that transition well, and you're going to lose them along the way. But then there are friends who can do both, and they're gold. So hang in there with that. Um, Last thing I'll say, and this is for anyone with any career path, do not pursue happiness. Do not pursue happiness. It is a trap. Pursue peace. Pursue peace. If you pursue peace, you will be happy. But there are many people who are pursuing happiness who are very unhappy.
That is a
So
sermon. That is a sermon.
so don't chase the happiness trap. It's not it will not give you what you want. But if you pick a path and you have peace, now you've made room to be happy. But where there is no peace, there cannot be any happiness. So with whatever you're doing, make sure there's peace, that there's alignment between your head, your heart, and the spirit of the Lord. And if you do that, even when storms come, you'll be able to have peace.
Of course, you ended this interview with the sermon. It would not be Pastor Cadet if you didn't.
You gotta.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I was blessed, and I know everyone who's listening is going to be blessed. And I pray that God continues to bless your ministry and this journey that you're going on. And I'm excited to see what's next for you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing everything you're doing, President. We appreciate you. You're doing great work. So thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thank you.
No problem.